My name is Audrey Mercer. I'm 63 years old, and I used to run a small chain of boutiques along the coast of Sarasota, Florida. These days, I live quietly in the same house my husband and I bought 40 years ago, the one that still smells faintly of sea salt and sandalwood. I thought I'd grown used to the silence after he passed, but that morning, the silence broke in a way I'll never forget. The phone rang with that sharp, modern tone that never feels quite human. It was my son's name glowing on the screen, Dan Mercer. For a brief second, I smiled. We hadn't spoken in a week, and I thought maybe he was calling about the cruise we'd all planned for next month. I'd already bought a light blue dress for the trip. Something simple. Something that felt like ocean breeze. When I picked up, his voice was shaky but rehearsed, like someone trying to sound casual about bad news. "Mom, the cruise is canceled." I remember blinking, waiting for the reason. Then came the second blow. Quieter, almost whispered. "We're broke." Those two words hit like cold water. I could almost hear the tremor in his throat. He said their business deal had collapsed. Mallory, his wife, was devastated. They had non-refundable deposits and bills piling up. He sounded embarrassed, apologetic. I felt a knot twist inside my chest. Without thinking, I opened my banking app. Before he could finish explaining, I said softly, "Don't worry, honey. I'll send something to help." He protested, just enough to make it sound noble. But I knew the rhythm of that resistance. It always ended the same way. Within 2 minutes, I transferred $2,500 to his account. He sighed, thanked me, called me the best mom in the world, and promised they'd pay it back soon. I told him not to worry about that, though a small ache crept into my voice when I said it. When the call ended, the room fell silent again. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the distant roll of waves outside filled the air. I stood there holding my phone, staring at the empty kitchen counter, and something inside me whispered that the silence after kindness can feel lonelier than silence itself. I looked over at the brochure that still sat open on the table. Caribbean Horizons Cruise, 7 Nights of Paradise. The edges were bent, a small coffee stain on the corner. Next to it lay the scarf I had packed weeks ago, still folded neatly, never worn. My fingers brushed across the glossy page. For a moment, I could almost hear the ocean, the sound of champagne glasses clinking, laughter floating over the water. It's funny how love makes you blind and proud of it. I told myself helping him was natural. That's what mothers do. Still, a faint unease lingered beneath the comfort. Something about his tone, the quick pauses between words. Maybe it was just worry, I thought. Or maybe it was the same instinct my husband used to talk about. The one that lives somewhere between the heart and the gut. I walked to the porch, letting the sea air brush against my face. The waves were calm that day, almost indifferent. I thought of how my husband used to say, "You can always tell when someone's lying. Their silence hums differently." I laughed at myself for remembering that. Then I sat there for a long time, phone still in my hand, waiting for the guilt to fade. You know, people often say that money doesn't change love, but it does. It stretches it, tests it, sometimes exposes what was hidden. I didn't know it then, but that small transfer I made with trembling fingers would open a door I could never close again. Before we go further, I want to ask you something. If your own child called you, said he was broke, said his dream had fallen apart, would you have sent the money too? Think about it, not as a question of right or wrong, but as a moment of heart versus reason. Because that's where my story began. Not with betrayal, but with love, too willing to save. That night, I made myself a cup of tea, stared out at the dark horizon, and whispered, "At least they'll rest now. Maybe we'll all rest." I believed it. I needed to believe it. But 3 days later, when I opened Facebook, what I saw there froze my breath. Smiles, champagne, ocean sunlight, my son, his wife, her parents, the same cruise that was supposed to be canceled, the same date printed right below the post. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just stared at the screen, my hand shaking slightly as I zoomed in on their faces. Behind them, a banner read, "Family Paradise." And in that moment, I knew the world had shifted, not loudly, but in the quiet way that breaks your heart the most. The phone slipped from my fingers onto the floor, and all I could hear was the distant echo of the sea, steady, endless, and suddenly so far away. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was still, the kind of quiet that presses on your skin like soft cotton. I sat by the window, the sky still gray, and watched the faint shimmer of the Gulf beyond the palms. For years, that view had been my small piece of peace. It reminded me of him, Henry, my husband. He always said the sea was God's mirror, calm on the surface, deep and unknowable beneath. I reached for the postcard he'd given me on our 30th anniversary. The edges were faded now, the ink slightly smudged. On the front was a watercolor of a cruise ship drifting over a turquoise horizon. On the back, in his neat handwriting, it read, "See the ocean for us." He had written that after his first heart attack, when traveling had become too difficult. I'd promised him I would. For years, I couldn't bring myself to do it. But when Dan mentioned the family cruise, something inside me woke up again. I thought, maybe this was how healing looked. Sailing where Henry couldn't, with our son beside me. I had bought a small blue suitcase just for that trip. Inside, neatly folded, were linen, pants, a sun hat, and the soft coral blouse Henry always said made me look like morning. I had even found an old seashell brooch in the drawer, one I hadn't worn since our honeymoon. It was supposed to be a new chapter, a quiet circle closing. Now, it just felt like an open wound. I turned on my phone and opened the cruise brochure again. The photos were beautiful. Clear skies, smiling couples, hands clinking glasses over sunset dinners. My eyes lingered on the section titled Deck 7, Serenity Spa. I had circled it once in pen. A place meant for peace, I thought bitterly. Funny how peace becomes something you have to buy. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear fell on the glossy page. It made the ocean image shimmer for a moment, as if the ship were really moving. I wiped it quickly and closed the brochure. On the kitchen counter sat the voice recorder Henry used to leave me messages on whenever he traveled for work. I hadn't played it in years, but something told me to. The batteries were still good. I pressed play, and his voice came through, gentle, steady, like sunlight through rain. "Hey, love, just checking in. I know you always worry. You shouldn't. You've got this gift, Audrey. You see truth before it's spoken. If they ever make you doubt yourself, remember who you are." I froze. That message had been recorded long before Dan's cruise call, yet it felt like it was meant for that very moment. I let the recorder rest in my lap and closed my eyes. For a few minutes, I could almost feel him beside me. The way he'd place his hand over mine, thumb tracing slow circles. The way his silence never felt empty. I whispered, "I miss you," though I knew the sea had already carried that message countless times. When I opened my eyes again, the light outside had changed. The horizon glowed faintly pink, a new day beginning. I made a silent promise to stay calm, to see clearly, to remember who I was. But the ache didn't leave. It stayed with me all morning, subtle but heavy. I walked through the house, touching the things that once held meaning. His old jacket still hanging by the door, our wedding photo, the seashell lamp he'd made from driftwood. Every item felt like a chapter I hadn't finished reading. People say betrayal hurts because of the lie, but that's not quite true. What really hurts is how easily you believed it. That afternoon, I sat by the window again. A seagull landed on the railing, pecked at a crumb, and flew off toward the water. I envied how effortlessly it could leave. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my phone. I wanted to call Dan, to ask if maybe there was some mistake, if the photos I saw online were old ones, or private memories shared too soon. But something stopped me. That quiet voice from Henry's recording. You see truth before it's spoken. So instead, I began writing. Not a letter to him. A record, maybe. Notes in a small notebook I'd kept since my boutique days. The first page read simply, January. Cruise canceled. $2,500 sent. It was just a line, but it felt like an anchor. Something told me I'd need it later. As evening approached, I stood outside and watched the tide roll in. The air smelled faintly of salt and jasmine. Somewhere down the beach, laughter carried faintly over the wind. I imagined them, Dan, Mallory, her parents, clinking glasses, their faces lit by the sunset. I tried to picture them thinking of me, even for a second. I couldn't. That night, I replayed Henry's message once more before bed. The words were softer now, almost blending into the hum of the sea. Remember who you are. And I whispered back, I will. 3 days later, the sound of rain against the windows woke me early. It was one of those Florida mornings when the sky felt close enough to touch, the kind of weather that made the sea look like tarnished glass. I made coffee, scrolled through messages, and saw nothing from Dan. Not a single text. The silence felt wrong, like a missing heartbeat. I tried calling him once, then twice. Straight to voicemail. His voice recording played. Hey, it's Dan. Leave a message. It sounded cheerful, rehearsed, the same tone he'd used when telling me the cruise was canceled. I left a short message, trying to sound calm. Just checking in, sweetheart. Hope everything's okay. Call when you can. But as I hung up, I noticed something odd. My Facebook app had been logged out. It wasn't unusual. I rarely used it. But for some reason, I decided to sign back in. It took 3 tries to remember the password. The recovery code took longer than it should have. When the page finally loaded, my feed flickered with photos of beaches, meals, friends' grandchildren. And then one image stopped me cold. A photo of Dan and Mallory standing on the deck of a ship. The ship. Mallory's golden hair was blowing in the breeze, her sunglasses pushed up just enough to reveal a perfect smile. Dan stood beside her in a pressed white shirt, a glass of champagne in his hand. The ocean stretched behind them, endless and bright. My stomach turned. For a moment, I thought it had to be an old photo, but when I looked closer, I saw the caption, Family Paradise, Day 2. And right below it, the timestamp, 3 days ago, the exact day I'd sent him the money. There were other faces in the photo, too. Roger and Vivian Pierce, Mallory's parents. Roger was easy to spot, broad-shouldered, wearing one of those linen shirts that screamed casual wealth. Vivian had her arm looped through his, her smile sharp and practiced. Behind them, on the white railing, I could just make out the logo, Caribbean Horizons Cruise. The same name printed across the brochure still sitting on my kitchen table. The phone felt heavy in my hand. I scrolled further. More photos. Mallory laughing over dinner. Roger toasting with a bottle of champagne. Dan dancing with her, under string lights, his smile wide, careless, unburdened. Each photo cut deeper. I could feel my pulse in my ears, a steady, muffled pounding. My first thought was denial. It must have been some mix-up, a delayed upload. Then another image appeared, posted just an hour ago. Mallory's caption read, "So grateful for family time after such a stressful year." That was the moment everything inside me went still. I took a screenshot, then another, then another. I created a folder on my desktop and titled it Family Cruise. My hands were trembling, but I kept saving. Every detail mattered. The dates, the tags, the comments. Underneath one of the photos, someone had written, "Looks amazing. Thought your trip got canceled?" Mallory replied with a single emoji, a winking face. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the screen. Minutes, maybe hours. The coffee beside me had gone cold. The sound of the rain had faded into the background. When Henry was alive, he used to tell me that truth doesn't need to shout. It just waits until you stop lying to yourself. I heard that sentence in my mind, as if he were standing right behind me. I closed the laptop gently, like I was afraid of breaking something sacred. The reflection of my face in the dark screen startled me. I looked older, harder. Not sad, exactly. Just different. I walked to the living room, pulled open the drawer where I kept old bills, letters, and receipts. I needed air, something solid to hold on to. But all I found were reminders of how much I'd already given: college tuition, car repairs, moving costs, temporary loans that were never mentioned again. Somewhere deep down, I already knew what had happened. The cruise wasn't canceled. My son had lied. The realization didn't come with anger. It came with a strange, cold clarity, like the moment the tide pulls back and reveals the shape of the rocks beneath. I sat by the window again, watching the rain drift sideways across the glass. My phone buzzed once, a notification from Facebook. Another photo had been posted. This time, Dan and Mallory were clinking glasses with Roger and Vivian. The caption read, "To new beginnings." I saved that one too. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about memory, about proof, about not being told I imagined it later. As the day faded, the light in the house grew dim and blue. I could hear the faint hum of waves beyond the windows, calm and relentless. I whispered to myself, "Remember who you are." And I began writing again in that small notebook. The second entry was simple. Cruise confirmed. Lie confirmed. The words steadied me. By the time night fell, I knew what I needed to do next. Not to confront. Not yet. To observe. To record. To wait. I closed the notebook, placed it beside the old postcard from Henry, and exhaled slowly. The ocean outside was dark now, invisible, but I could hear it whispering through the wind. It didn't sound angry. It sounded patient. And I decided I would be too. The morning after I saw those photos, I woke with a strange calmness, the kind that comes when pain becomes direction. The rain had passed. Sunlight slid through the blinds in quiet stripes, falling across the table where my laptop still sat open. The folder I'd created, Family Cruise, waited on the desktop like a wound that refused to close. I stared at it for a long time, then opened it again, this time without trembling. I started counting. Photo timestamps. The day of the call. The moment I sent the transfer. The receipts that I could find from past months. Each detail fit together like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle I never wanted to solve. I opened my bank statements, scrolling through years of transactions. Every few months, there it was. $500, $200, $800, always labeled something vague. Help, loan, for Dan. I pulled out an old ledger from the cabinet, the one I used back when I still managed the boutique. The paper smelled faintly of dust and perfume. I began writing. Dates, amounts, reasons. In 8 years, the total came to $70,000. $70,000. I stared at the number, my hand tightening around the pen. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the pattern. Every call had started the same way. A sigh, a pause, a story. It's temporary. Just until next month. We're struggling, Mom. And every time I'd believed him. Maybe because it felt better to give than to admit I'd lost him to pride and desperation. I made a new folder on my computer titled Mercer Family Truth. Inside, I placed screenshots, bank records, notes. For the first time, I looked at my son, not as the boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during thunderstorms, but as a man whose silence had turned into strategy. The realization didn't bring anger. It brought distance. At noon, I made myself a sandwich I barely tasted and sat on the porch, the sound of waves steady against the shore. Across the street, Clara Brooks was trimming her rose bushes. She waved, and I waved back, smiling faintly. She didn't know. No one did. The quiet humiliation felt like salt in my chest. I returned inside and printed the records one by one. The hum of the printer filled the house, rhythmic and final. Each page slid out like a small truth finally made visible. I labeled a folder with a piece of masking tape. For Evelyn. I hadn't called her yet, but I would. Evelyn Price was an old acquaintance from my boutique days, now a respected estate attorney. She had once helped me with Henry's will, and I trusted her. Before calling her, I took a moment to breathe. The room smelled faintly of lavender cleaner and printer ink. The ocean breeze pushed softly through the open window. I thought again of Henry's voice on the recorder. "You've got this gift, Audrey. You see truth before it's spoken." I whispered to the empty room. You were right. I picked up the phone and dialed Evelyn's number, but before she answered, I hesitated. I looked down at the papers spread across my dining table, the photos, the transfers, the neat column of amounts. My hands hovered over them, tracing the outlines of proof that my own child had built a house of lies, brick by brick, using my faith as mortar. When Evelyn answered, her tone was brisk but warm. "Audrey, it's been a while. How are you?" I paused before replying. "I'm finding out who I am again," I said softly. Then, after a deep breath, "I need your help." Her voice shifted instantly, alert but gentle. "Tell me what's going on." I didn't tell her everything yet, only that I needed to understand how to protect what little I had left, in case someone tried to take it again. She listened, quiet and precise, and said, "Come by tomorrow. Bring everything." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the folder. Bring everything. The words echoed. I gathered the papers, slid them into a manila envelope, and placed it beside my purse. The motion was deliberate, almost ceremonial. Then I walked to the window. Outside, the tide was rising again, foam curling over the sand like breath. For a moment, I wondered if Dan had ever truly felt guilty. Maybe in his mind, he was just borrowing. Maybe he thought I didn't need the money, that helping him made me feel useful. But lies, once spoken, have a life of their own. They grow in the dark, and before you know it, they've replaced truth completely. I turned off the lights and let the late afternoon sun fill the house. Shadows stretched long across the floor. I whispered to the empty air, "This isn't revenge, Henry. It's remembering." I opened my notebook again and wrote the next line beneath the last. Document everything. It felt like a prayer, steady, quiet, resolute. When I finally went to bed that night, the sound of the ocean seeped through the window, slow and rhythmic. Somewhere in that rhythm, I found something close to peace. Not forgiveness, not yet, but control. And that, for the first time in a long while, felt enough to begin. 2 days later, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I looked out the kitchen window, I saw Dan's car pulling up, his dark blue sedan, freshly washed, the same one he once claimed was on its last legs. He stepped out wearing a collared shirt and sunglasses, balancing 2 cups of coffee from the cafe downtown. It was the same coffee he used to bring me on Sundays, when things between us still felt easy. I took a deep breath before opening the door. "Well, this is a surprise," I said, forcing a small smile. He grinned, though there was something tight around his mouth. "Thought I'd check on you. Brought your favorite vanilla latte, right?" I took the cup from him, its warmth steady against my palms. "That's thoughtful of you," I said softly. "Come in." He looked around the living room as if seeing it for the first time. The framed photos, the old piano, the neat rows of books Henry once organized by color. "Place looks great, Mom. You've been keeping busy?" "I try to," I said. "There's always something to tend to." He nodded, sitting down on the edge of the couch. His eyes darted briefly toward the dining table where my papers had been the day before. I'd already cleared them, replacing them with a vase of roses from the garden. Still, his glance lingered a little too long. We talked about nothing for a while: the weather, a neighbor's new dog, a cafe that had closed downtown. He laughed more than usual, a little too loudly. Between sentences, his hand kept brushing against his pocket, as if checking for something. Finally, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Mom," he began, "I wanted to thank you again for helping out last week. It meant a lot." "You don't have to thank me, Dan," I said gently. "That's what family does." He smiled, looking down at the floor. "Yeah, family." His voice trailed off. Then he added, "You know, things have been rough, but I think we're turning a corner. I've been talking to Roger about a new project, something stable, something long-term." Roger. The name sat heavy in the air, but I said nothing. I simply nodded and took a sip of coffee. "That sounds promising," I said, though the word tasted bitter. He looked relieved, like he'd passed a small test. "Yeah, it could be something really good for all of us." I set my cup down, letting a quiet stretch fill the space. He shifted slightly in his seat. His knee bounced. The silence pressed in around him, soft but firm. "So," I said finally, "how's Mallory?" "She's good. Tired from the trip, but good." His words came too fast. I smiled faintly. "The trip?" He froze. It was the smallest pause, but I caught it. "Oh, the little weekend thing we did, to unwind after everything." My expression didn't change. "That's nice," I said simply. He nodded quickly. "Yeah, needed it." The air between us turned fragile, like glass ready to crack. He stood abruptly. "I should get going. Roger's waiting to go over some numbers with me." He reached for his car keys, but as he stood, a folded slip of paper slid from his pocket and fluttered to the floor. It landed just beside my foot. I bent to pick it up before he could. "You dropped something," I said. He reached out, a little too quickly. "Oh, that's nothing, just an old receipt." But my eyes had already caught the print before I handed it back. Pierce Travel Agency, cruise deposit. The date matched the week he'd called me. I smiled calmly as I placed it in his hand. "Be careful, honey. Sometimes the things we drop tell the truth before we're ready to." He blinked, confused, then forced a laugh. "You and your sayings, Mom." He tucked the paper away and kissed my cheek. "I'll call you soon, okay?" "Of course," I said, walking him to the door. When his car disappeared down the street, I closed the door quietly, leaned against it, and exhaled. The house fell still again. The faint smell of his cologne lingered, mixing with the scent of roses. I stood there for a long moment, coffee cooling in my hand. Then I walked back to the table, picked up my phone, and scrolled to Evelyn's number. When she answered, her voice was brisk. "Audrey, I've been expecting your call." "I think I'm ready," I said. "Then let's get started," she replied. After we hung up, I looked down at the small note I had written in my notebook earlier that week. Document everything. I added one more line beneath it. Even accidents aren't accidents when truth wants to be found. The ocean outside was calm again, glittering faintly through the blinds. Somewhere, I could almost hear Henry's voice, patient and sure. And I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid to see it through. The next morning, I dressed with the kind of care that comes from quiet purpose. A soft blouse, navy slacks, a pair of pearl earrings Henry once bought me for my birthday. I hadn't worn them in years. I looked at myself in the mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were calm, but sharp. Older, yes, but no longer unsure. Evelyn Price's office sat on the second floor of a small brick building near downtown Sarasota, with wide windows overlooking the harbor. I'd been there once before, years ago, when she helped me finalize Henry's estate. Back then, I was fragile, uncertain about everything. This time, I walked in steady. She stood when she saw me. "Audrey," she said warmly, "you look wonderful." I smiled faintly. "Thank you. It's been an interesting week." She gestured toward the chair across from her desk. "I read between the lines when you called. I think I know what this is about." I set the manila envelope on the desk. "Everything's in there. Bank records, transfers, screenshots. I want to make sure my home and savings are protected." Evelyn took a slow breath, opening the envelope carefully. She skimmed through the pages, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I see. You've been generous. Too generous." I said nothing. After a long pause, she looked up. "Tell me, Audrey, do you want justice or do you want peace?" "Both," I said simply. "But one has to come before the other." She leaned back in her chair. "Then we'll need to make your assets untouchable. Have you ever heard of an irrevocable trust?" I shook my head. "No, but I'm listening." "It's like locking your safe and throwing the key into the ocean," she said, her tone calm, measured. "Once it's set, no one, not even you, can change it. It ensures that your property and funds go exactly where you decide, and no challenge can undo it unless the court finds you incompetent." "Incompetent," I repeated softly. The word hung in the air like a warning. Evelyn nodded. "That's the usual attack when family gets desperate. But there are ways to prepare for that too." She began explaining details, how we'd create the trust, how it would list a charity as the beneficiary, how my house would be placed safely inside it, and how every cent of my remaining savings would be directed according to my will. I listened carefully, noting every word. "What charity?" I asked finally. Evelyn smiled. "That's up to you." I thought of Henry's voice, the postcard, the promise to see the ocean. I thought of all the men who came back from wars with nowhere to go, the ones Henry used to hire at the shop to sweep floors or paint shelves, just so they'd have something to hold on to. "The Coastal Veterans Foundation," I said. "They help displaced veterans find homes." Evelyn nodded approvingly. "A good choice. We'll draft it this week. You'll be the lifetime trustee, and after you, the funds will transfer automatically to them." I felt a strange warmth in my chest. "Good," I said quietly. "I'd rather my money build roofs for people who've lost theirs than fill another lie." She smiled faintly, then glanced down at one of the receipts. "You said your son told you the cruise was canceled?" I nodded. She turned the page around. "Then why is there a charge on his joint credit account from the same week? for Caribbean Horizon's cruise services. I stared at the page. The line of numbers looked small, almost harmless, but it confirmed everything I already knew. Evelyn slid it back toward me. "It's better you know," she said softly. I closed my eyes for a moment and nodded. "Thank you." We spent the next hour reviewing documents, signing drafts, scheduling a notary. She moved with precision, explaining every clause in plain language. I appreciated that. She never spoke down to me, never softened the reality. It felt clean, honest. When we finished, she looked at me thoughtfully. "You know, Audrey, this isn't about punishment. It's about clarity. Once you've secured your future, you'll find peace comes easier." I met her gaze. "I think peace needs proof first." She smiled gently. "Then we'll give you both." As I stood to leave, she placed a reassuring hand on mine. "You're doing the right thing. It's quiet justice, not loud revenge. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." I walked out into the warm afternoon light, the ocean breeze carrying the faint sound of seagulls. My purse felt heavier with the documents inside, but my steps were light. When I reached home, I opened my notebook and added a new entry: meeting with Evelyn, plan in motion. The sun was setting beyond the palms, painting the water gold. I thought about how lies unravel, not all at once, but thread by thread, until truth stands naked in the light. And for the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid to look at it. The sea outside shimmered like it was listening. It was early afternoon when Dan called again, his voice cheerful, almost too bright. "Hey, Mom, you got a minute? Mallory and I were wondering if we could drop by. There's something exciting we want to show you." I paused, glancing at the folder from Evelyn still sitting on my kitchen counter. "Of course," I said lightly. "Come by any time." They arrived an hour later. Mallory stepped out first, her hair perfectly styled, her smile a touch too polished. Dan followed, carrying a sleek black folder under his arm. As they walked up the path, I noticed how their hands never quite touched. I opened the door before they could knock. "Hi, Mom," Mallory said, her tone soft, careful. "We didn't mean to interrupt your day. We just wanted to talk about something special." I gestured toward the living room. "Then come in. I always have time for special things." They sat together on the couch, exchanging a quick look, the kind couples share when they've rehearsed what's coming. Dan opened the folder and spread out a series of colorful charts and glossy renderings across my coffee table. "We're working on something big, Mom. It's a franchise opportunity. Coastal Cafe. You'd love it. Beachfront cafes all along the Gulf, focusing on local ingredients. We're already in talks with investors, but, well, we wanted you to be part of it first." I leaned forward, pretending interest. The images showed cheerful cafes painted in blues and whites, with families smiling under string lights. Mallory's voice was warm, practiced. "We think it's the perfect legacy for the family. Something Dan can really build on." "The family," I repeated softly. Dan nodded eagerly. "Exactly. It's not just about money. It's about future, connection, carrying on what you and Dad built. You taught me about small business, about community. This is our way of honoring that." I smiled faintly, though my heart had already gone cold. "And what would you need from me?" He hesitated just enough. $75,000 to start, just to secure the location and get the first lease. After that, it'll sustain itself. 75. Not 25. Not even 50. The number landed like a quiet insult wrapped in sentiment. Mallory reached out, placing a hand over mine. "I know it's a lot to ask, Mom, but we really believe in this. It's something good, something that could finally stabilize everything." Her eyes darted quickly toward Dan before meeting mine again. Roger thinks it's a brilliant idea. Roger. Again. His name seemed to float through every lie like the scent of cologne that lingers too long. I folded my hands in my lap. It sounds ambitious, I said evenly. Do you have a business plan? Dan grinned. Of course, everything's in the deck. He flipped through slides filled with neat graphs, rising projections, and phrases like projected ROI and community-based growth. It all looked professional, almost convincing. Almost. I see, I said after a long silence. And when would you need my answer? Mallory leaned in. Soon, if possible. The lease offer expires in a week. Roger's ready to move forward with or without us, but we wanted you to have the first chance to invest. The phrasing wasn't lost on me. Not help. Invest. It sounded cleaner, more respectable, but the scent of desperation hid underneath every polished word. I nodded slowly, as if weighing the decision. Let me think about it, I said. A week, you said. Yes, Dan replied quickly. We'll send over the details tonight. Just take a look. You'll see. It's solid. I smiled gently. I'm sure it is. For a few seconds, the room was quiet except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Dan's knee bounced again. Mallory adjusted her bracelet, her eyes flicking toward me, then down. Finally, I stood. Would you two like some tea? They both declined at once. We actually have to run, Dan said, gathering the papers. Roger's expecting us. Of course he is, I said softly. They thanked me, hugged me, and walked to the door. I watched from the window as they got into the car. Before driving away, Dan turned to say something to Mallory, his hands moving quickly, his mouth tight. She looked down. When they were gone, I sat on the couch, the faint smell of their perfume still lingering in the air. I opened my notebook and wrote, Coastal Cafe, 75K, 1 week. Then beneath it, already locked. Because by then, Evelyn had finished the trust. Everything, my house, my savings, my accounts, was no longer mine to give. The papers had been notarized that very morning, legally binding, irrevocable, untouchable. I leaned back, letting out a long, slow breath. I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was stillness, like the sea at low tide, holding its secrets just beneath the surface. That evening, I called Evelyn. It's done, I said. She replied, Good, then you're safe. Safe, I echoed quietly, staring at the darkening horizon. The word felt heavy, like a door closing. Outside, the waves rolled in steady rhythm, as if the world itself approved of quiet justice. The day they came for the money was warm and windless, the kind of Florida afternoon where even the air seemed to hold its breath. I spent the morning preparing the house, not cleaning, not decorating, just arranging it so that everything had its place. The table near the window was polished to a soft glow. A single envelope lay at its center, pale against the dark wood. The weight inside it was small, but what it carried would change everything. At 2:00, I heard the familiar hum of Dan's car pulling into the driveway. I didn't move right away. I let the sound of his footsteps approach, slow and steady on the path. Then came the knock. 3 short taps, the same rhythm he used as a boy. I opened the door and smiled as if I hadn't spent the week rehearsing this moment. Hi, Mom, he said lightly, holding a hopeful grin that didn't reach his eyes. Mallory stood beside him, her fingers knotted around the strap of her purse. Come in, I said. I've been expecting you. They followed me to the dining room, the light from the window spilling across the table. The envelope caught the sun just enough to gleam faintly. Dan's eyes flickered toward it. He laughed nervously. You really didn't have to go to the trouble of making it formal, Mom. We could have done this over dinner. I prefer daylight, I said calmly, taking my seat. It makes everything clearer. He chuckled, not sure how to respond. Mallory sat quietly beside him, her gaze fixed on the floor. For a few seconds, the only sound was the ticking clock. Then Dan leaned forward, all warmth and confidence again. "So, did you have a chance to look at the proposal?" "I did," I said, "and I thought carefully about what you asked for." His smile widened, relieved. "That's great. I knew you'd see the potential." I nodded toward the envelope. "I decided to give you something better." He blinked, confused. "Better?" I slid the envelope across the table toward him. The sound it made, paper against wood, was soft but final. "Take this instead." He reached for it, his fingers trembling slightly. He opened it with an eagerness that made my heart ache. For a brief moment, I saw the boy he once was. The one who used to bring me wildflowers after school, who thought the world was simple and kind. But when he pulled out the papers inside, the color drained from his face. "What is this?" he asked, voice low. "Irrevocable trust documents," I said. "Executed and notarized last week. Everything I own. This house, my savings, what's left of Dad's investments, is now held by the Coastal Veterans Foundation. They'll use it to build homes for people who don't have one." He stared at the page as if trying to will the words into something else. Mallory's hand went to her mouth. "Mom, what do you mean you gave it all away?" "I didn't give it away," I said softly. "I placed it where it can't be stolen." He pushed back in his chair, the legs scraping the floor. "You can't do this. You're not thinking straight. Roger said—" The sentence stopped halfway, like he realized too late what had slipped. I tilted my head. "Roger said what?" He froze, eyes darting to Mallory, who looked ready to cry. "Nothing," he muttered. "Ah," I said quietly. "Nothing often says a great deal." He stood abruptly, pacing. "Mom, this isn't right. You need to reverse it. You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted, my voice steady but gentle. "And it's already done. I wanted to make sure that what your father and I built wouldn't turn into a tool for someone else's pride." Mallory's eyes filled with tears. "Audrey, he didn't mean—" But Dan cut her off. "Don't," he snapped. Then softer, pleading, "Mom, please, we needed that money. Things are complicated, you don't understand." I rose slowly from my chair. "Then explain it to me." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His hands shook. I watched the realization spread across his face, the slow, heavy collapse of every excuse he had built. "I wanted to help you," I said quietly, "even when you lied. But help isn't meant to be taken. It's meant to be earned. You can still rebuild, Dan, just not with what isn't yours." The room was silent except for the faint creak of the ceiling fan. Mallory stood, tears slipping down her cheek. She whispered, "He didn't want to do it, Audrey. Roger pressured him. He said it was just a loan." Dan turned to her sharply, his voice breaking. "Mallory, stop." But the damage was done. I looked at him, my heart both heavy and free. You see, the truth has a way of showing itself, even when you try to hide it under good intentions. He sank back into the chair, his face pale. "You'd really do this to your own son?" I met his gaze, my voice calm but unflinching. "I didn't do this to you, Dan. You did it to yourself. I'm just giving you a mirror." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he stood and walked toward the door, his steps uneven. Mallory lingered, her eyes full of shame and something else. Relief, maybe. She whispered, "I'm sorry," and followed him out. When the door closed, the house fell into the kind of silence that hums after a storm. I exhaled slowly, my hands steady on the table. The envelope lay open, empty now, its contents already doing their work. Outside, the sky had begun to change, light fading to amber, the sea glowing like glass. I felt no triumph, no anger, just a quiet steadiness. I picked up my notebook and wrote one sentence: justice through peace. Then I poured myself a cup of tea and watched the horizon until the sun disappeared, leaving only the faint reflection of the ocean on the window pane. It started 3 days later. The air was heavy with salt and summer heat when the first envelope arrived. FedEx, stamped urgent. Inside was a letter printed on heavy cream paper with the logo of the Pierce Law Group embossed at the top. I unfolded it slowly, already knowing what it would say. To Mrs. Audrey Mercer, we represent Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Mercer in regard to the recent transfer of assets into a trust believed to have been executed under duress and potential diminished capacity. Please be advised that our clients intend to contest the trust's validity unless it is rescinded voluntarily within 7 days. I read it twice. Not once did it mention love or family or even respect, just ownership, as if my dignity were a thing to be filed under property disputes. I placed the letter neatly beside my teacup and stared out the window. The sea was calm, indifferent, untroubled by paper storms. The phone rang before noon. Evelyn's name appeared on the screen. "I've seen it," she said the moment I answered. "They're moving fast." "I expected that," I replied softly. "What's our move?" "First, we don't react. They're trying to rattle you. Second, we prepare. I want you to get full medical and psychological evaluations immediately. If they plan to claim incompetence, we'll hand them evidence they can't touch." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "And Roger?" Evelyn's voice sharpened. "He's orchestrating this. His name's on every filing, not your son's." Of course it was. Roger Pierce, Mallory's father, the man who smiled with his teeth and never with his eyes. I'd known his type all my life. Men like Roger believed control was proof of worth. He had likely drafted that letter himself, sitting in his marble-tiled office, convinced that intimidation could pass for justice. After the call, I sat for a while, letting the sound of the waves steady my breathing. Then I dialed a number Evelyn had given me the day before. "Marcus Cole," a voice answered. Low, gravelly, efficient. "Evelyn said you might be available," I said. He didn't ask for small talk. "You're Mrs. Mercer?" "Yes." "I'm a private investigator," he said. "I gather evidence. What are we looking for?" "Truth," I said. "And the paper trail that leads to it." He chuckled softly. "I can work with that. Send me whatever you have." I forwarded him copies of the trust documents, Roger's letter, and a few photos from Facebook that still made my stomach twist. Within an hour, he texted back. "I'll start with the Pierces. Check their renovation permits, accounts, and the boat registry." Boat registry. That one made me pause. I hadn't told him about Roger's yacht, but apparently everyone in Sarasota knew about it. By evening, Marcus had already found the first crack. He called as the sun was setting, his voice calm, but edged with quiet satisfaction. "Got something interesting," he said. "A deposit from a Mercer family account, same week as your son's financial emergency. It was used to pay a contractor for work on Roger Pierce's yacht. A new deck, specifically. Invoice matches the date you wired your son that $20,500. I closed my eyes. I could almost hear the clinking of glasses from those cruise photos, the laughter under string lights. "Send it to Evelyn," I said. "All of it." "Already did." After we hung up, I sat at the table and wrote in my notebook. "Pierce, yacht, paid with my money." Then below it, "Truth is quiet, but it leaves footprints." That night, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail this time, from Clara, my neighbor. Her tone was hesitant. "Audrey, dear, I don't mean to pry, but people are talking. Someone mentioned you might be unwell, that you gave your house away. I told them nonsense, but maybe you should know." I smiled bitterly, though she couldn't hear it. Vivian's work, no doubt. Social sabotage was her weapon of choice. It was cleaner than law, and it spread faster. I called Clara back and reassured her gently. "Don't worry, Clara. I'm perfectly fine. Just some family paperwork. It'll settle soon." After the call, I sat in silence, the weight of the day settling on my shoulders. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered, but there was a steadiness there I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not fear, resolve. When the phone rang again, I didn't need to check the name. Evelyn's tone was brisk. "Marcus's evidence is solid. We'll respond formally tomorrow, but I want you to rest tonight, Audrey." "I will," I said, "though I doubt Roger plans to." She laughed quietly. "That's fine. Let him stay awake. You'll win by sleeping soundly." When the line went dead, I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath. The sea outside had turned silver in the moonlight, calm and watchful. On the table beside me lay 2 envelopes, Roger's letter of intimidation and my own notebook of quiet truths. One spoke of threats, the other of preparation. And for the first time since this began, I realized something simple but powerful. Control doesn't always come from fighting louder. Sometimes it comes from standing so still that your silence becomes the loudest thing in the room. It began on a Sunday morning, as most quiet betrayals do, with a whisper dressed as concern. Clara texted me just after breakfast. "Audrey, dear, I think you should see this." Attached was a screenshot from Facebook. Vivian Pierce had posted a photo of me taken at a charity gala 2 years ago, standing alone by the buffet table, a glass of wine in hand. The caption read, "It breaks my heart to see someone I used to admire losing touch with reality. Sometimes grief can cloud judgment. Pray for those who can't tell when they're being manipulated." Within hours, the comments bloomed like mold in a closed room. People from the country club, the charity board, old boutique clients, all chiming in with sympathy disguised as gossip. So sad. Poor woman. I heard she gave away her house. Dementia runs in her family, doesn't it? I stared at the screen, my hands perfectly still. It was an elegant attack. No direct accusation, just suggestion. Enough poison to let imagination finish the job. I didn't reply. I didn't even close the app. I simply took a screenshot and forwarded it to Evelyn. Then I called Peter, Lang. Peter was one of Henry's oldest friends, a steady man with the kind of integrity that doesn't need to announce itself. He answered on the second ring. "Audrey, been too long." I explained briefly what was happening. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Send me the post." 5 minutes later, he called back, his voice calm but edged with something sharp. "She made a mistake posting that publicly. I'll handle it." "Peter, I don't want to fight," I said. "This isn't a fight," he replied. "It's a correction." By afternoon, his post appeared, measured, factual, devastatingly polite. For anyone concerned about Audrey Mercer's well-being, allow me to clarify. She is of sound mind, sound spirit, and sound integrity. As executor of Henry Mercer's estate, I've reviewed every legal filing related to her trust. It was her decision, wise, well-documented, and witnessed. Those spreading otherwise should review their own records before commenting on someone else's dignity. It took less than an hour for the ripple to spread. Comments under Vivian's post began to shift tone. Some deleted their sympathy, others added cautious emojis, the digital version of retreat. By evening, Vivian had quietly changed her post's privacy setting to friends only. But screenshots have a way of surviving. Clara called that night, her voice warm with pride. I knew you weren't losing your mind, Audrey. I told them all. Peter's post? Oh, it's everywhere. I smiled softly. Thank you, Clara. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and checked Marcus's latest email. Attached was a PDF labeled Pierce Contractor Payments, verified. Inside were copies of invoices showing Roger's company paying for renovations at his marina property, the same ones financed unknowingly by the money I'd sent Dan months earlier. Evelyn had highlighted the most damning line: payment source, transferred from Mercer family account. She'd already drafted a formal response to the Pierce lawyers, complete with documentation of my recent medical and psychological evaluations. But this was proof of motive. Marcus called later that evening. Vivian's post backfired, he said. Half the clubs turned against her. Someone even shared Peter's statement on the local paper's community page. Roger's trying to control the damage, but I've heard his investors are asking questions. Questions? I asked. About where their money's gone. He can't hide forever. I thanked him and hung up. Then I poured a glass of water, sat by the open window, and watched the palm trees sway in the soft night wind. The thing about people like Roger and Vivian is that they believe power lives in perception. But perception is fickle. It turns as quickly as the tide when truth finally surfaces. I picked up my notebook and wrote, Vivian's words travel fast, but truth travels farther. The house felt lighter that night. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and sea salt. For the first time in weeks, I turned off the lights without double-checking the locks. Before bed, I played Henry's old voicemail one more time. His voice filled the darkness. Warm, unhurried. You've got this gift, Audrey. You see truth before it's spoken. I'm starting to, I whispered. The next morning, my phone buzzed again. A new message from Evelyn. Just 3 words. He's making a move. I stared at the screen, calm and ready. Whatever Roger planned next, he didn't realize the tide had already turned. Evelyn was right. The Pierces' next move came wrapped in politeness, as legal maneuvers often do. A letter from their attorney requested a neutral medical and psychological evaluation to confirm my mental competency at the time the trust was created. It was phrased delicately, as if concern were the motive instead of control. But I saw it for what it was, a test of whether I could be shaken. I called Evelyn immediately. They're predictable, she said dryly. Let them dig the hole. We'll fill it with documentation. Who do you recommend? I asked. I'll set up appointments with 2 physicians and 1 psychologist. It's better when it comes from professionals of our choosing. And, Audrey, walk in there exactly as you are. Calm, lucid, and quietly dangerous. I smiled. That part comes naturally. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in a bright white examination room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and citrus. The geriatric specialist asked simple questions first. My name, date of birth, the current president. I answered without hesitation. Then came memory tests, arithmetic, drawing a clock face. My hand was steady, my lines clean. The doctor, a kind man with silver hair, nodded approvingly. You're sharper than most people my age, he said with a smile. I chuckled. That's because I don't waste time pretending not to be. He laughed softly as he signed his report. I wish all my patients were like you. The next appointment was with a neurologist who ran a series of reflex and cognition tests. Electrodes, flashing lights, quiet beeps. Everything came back clear. You're perfectly healthy, she said. No sign of cognitive decline. But it was the final appointment that mattered most. Dr. Helena Cho's office was nothing like the others. Soft light, shelves of books, faint notes of sandalwood in the air. She greeted me at the door herself, a woman in her early 50s, with warm eyes that carried both strength and sorrow. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, shaking my hand, "I'm Dr. Cho. Please, make yourself comfortable." I sat across from her, noticing the framed photographs on the wall: family, students, landscapes from Korea and California. She poured tea for both of us before speaking again. "I've reviewed the basics," she said gently. "But why don't you tell me, in your own words, what brought you here?" I took a slow breath. I created a trust to protect my home and savings. My son and his in-laws want to undo it. They claim I wasn't in my right mind when I did it. She nodded. "And were you?" "More than ever," I said quietly. Dr. Cho studied me for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "You don't sound angry." "I was," I admitted. "But anger takes energy I'd rather spend on clarity." She smiled faintly. "That's a rare kind of strength." We spoke for nearly an hour. She asked about Henry, about Dan, about the choices that led me here. I told her about the cruise, the lies, the silence that followed. When I finished, she sat back and said softly, "You're not here because you're unstable, Mrs. Mercer. You're here because you're sane in a world that punishes women for it." Her words landed somewhere deep in my chest. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear them. She continued, "You're decisive, methodical, and emotionally grounded. That intimidates people who rely on your compliance. But what you've done is both rational and ethical. I'll make sure that's clear in my report." I felt my throat tighten. "Thank you," I whispered. She smiled kindly. "You know, my mother went through something similar. Her brother tried to take her house after my father passed. She didn't fight with lawyers. She fought with patience. Sometimes dignity itself is the best defense." I nodded, understanding more than I could say. When the session ended, Dr. Cho handed me a signed document sealed in an envelope. "This confirms full competency and psychological stability," she said. "It also states that your decision was made with sound reasoning and moral intent. Evelyn will know what to do with it." I stood to leave, but before I reached the door, she said, "Mrs. Mercer?" "Yes?" "If they push again, don't argue. Just be still. Stillness disarms those who expect weakness." That night, Evelyn called. "Dr. Cho's report is gold," she said. "She's not only verified your competency, she's written an expert statement on your emotional intelligence, the kind of thing juries remember." "Good," I said softly. "Let Roger read every word." Evelyn chuckled. "He won't know whether to be angry or impressed." After we hung up, I sat by the window with the envelope beside me. The moonlight fell across the sea, calm and bright. I thought about Dr. Cho's words. Sometimes dignity itself is the best defense. Outside, the tide was rising again, slow and deliberate. I felt it deep inside me, too. The quiet rhythm of strength returning, steady as the waves. I picked up my notebook and wrote one new line. They wanted proof of madness. Instead, they'll find proof of peace. The house was quiet that night, the kind of quiet that hums just below the edge of hearing. And though lamps were dim, the sea breeze drifted through the curtains, and somewhere outside, a mockingbird was trying to imitate the sound of wind chimes. It was the night before everything would come to light. The meeting, the confrontation, the unraveling. I should have been nervous. Instead, I felt something closer to stillness, like the ocean when it decides not to move. The papers were ready on the kitchen table. Dr. Cho's evaluation, the notarized trust, Marcus's evidence files, all neatly stacked beside a cup of cold tea. I walked through the house slowly, touching the edges of old photographs as I passed. Henry in his shop apron, grinning beside a row of mannequins. Dan at 10 years old, missing a front tooth, holding a model sailboat. The walls felt heavy with memory. I stopped by the window overlooking the Gulf. The moon hung low, turning the water to silver. Somewhere beneath that same light, my son was probably pacing, worrying, wondering how to undo what he couldn't control. I didn't hate him. I just finally saw him clearly. On the shelf near the window sat Henry's old voice recorder. I hadn't played it in days. My fingers brushed over the worn plastic before I pressed play. The tape hissed for a moment. Then his voice filled the room, low, gentle, warm enough to ache. "Hey, love. Just checking in. You probably forgot this thing was on your desk. I was thinking about you this morning, about how you always find calm in chaos. You don't fight storms, Audrey. You wait them out. You know how to let truth rise to the surface on its own. That's your gift. Don't forget that." The message clicked softly at the end, but I didn't move. My eyes blurred as I stared out at the water. I whispered into the empty room. "I didn't forget, Henry. I just needed to remember." The air felt heavier now, full of his presence. It wasn't the kind of loneliness that hurts. It was the kind that holds you, like a hand resting gently on your shoulder. I poured myself a small glass of wine and sat on the porch, listening to the sea. The stars above looked faded tonight, but the moon was bright enough to keep the horizon alive. I thought about everything that had happened: the phone call, the lies, the envelope sliding across the table. It all seemed distant now, part of a story I'd finally learned to read without flinching. Inside, the clock chimed softly. I took another sip and said aloud, "You'd laugh if you saw me now, Henry." I finally did something bold. For a moment, I could almost hear him laugh, that low rumble that used to make the walls shake. I smiled through the tears. Then my phone buzzed, a message from Mallory. Just 2 words: "I'm sorry." I stared at the screen for a long time, my heart tightening. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something, an opening, a small fracture in the wall of deceit. I typed nothing in return. Some words don't need answers. I walked back inside and turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow of the lamp beside Henry's chair. The house looked peaceful, as if it understood what tomorrow would bring. Before going to bed, I opened my notebook one last time. My handwriting was smaller now, neater. Tomorrow, truth meets daylight. Beneath it, I wrote Henry's words from the recording. "You don't fight storms, you wait them out." I closed the book, set it beside the recorder, and whispered into the dark, "I'm ready now." The sea outside murmured softly in reply, a steady rhythm against the sand. I let that sound carry me to sleep, the way Henry used to hum beside me when words weren't enough. And for the first time since this began, I didn't dream of confrontation or betrayal. I dreamed of calm water and open sky, of standing on a ship's deck, wind in my hair, the horizon wide and forgiving. Morning sunlight spilled through the curtains, soft and golden, like a quiet prelude before truth. The house felt charged, expectant, the way it does just before a storm breaks. I dressed carefully, a cream blouse, simple slacks, and Henry's old silver bracelet. It had a small scratch shaped like a wave. He always said it brought luck when courage was needed. By 10, everyone had arrived. The air in the living room was thick with tension. Dan sat rigid on the edge of the couch, his jaw tight, his eyes darting between me and the floor. Mallory stood near the window, pale and trembling. Roger and Vivian took the love seat, their posture straight and rehearsed, as if they were in a courtroom, not my home. Evelyn sat beside me, calm, her notary seal resting on the table like a quiet weapon. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, eyes alert. Dr. Cho, who had come at Evelyn's request, observed from a chair in the corner, hands clasped in her lap. Peter had volunteered to witness, though he said little. His mere presence was enough to weigh the room toward truth. I began with the simplest words I knew. I called you all here because lies don't survive in daylight, and today we'll have plenty of daylight. Roger gave a low chuckle. Audrey, this isn't necessary. What's done is done. We only came because Daniel asked us to help you see reason. Evelyn lifted her head slightly, her tone crisp. Mr. Pierce, my client sees reason perfectly. That's precisely why she asked me here, to document everything. The notary is active as of now. He smirked, adjusting his cufflinks. Of course, lawyers and theatrics. Mallory flinched at his tone, her fingers twisting in front of her. Dan stared at the table. Mom, maybe we should just... But before he could finish, Mallory spoke. Her voice cracked on the first word. No, I can't keep quiet anymore. Roger's head snapped toward her. Mallory. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on me. Mrs. Mercer, Audrey, I owe you the truth. The room went still. Even the ceiling fan seemed to pause. Mallory's hands shook as she spoke. The cruise wasn't canceled. Roger booked it. He said it would be a family trip, that he'd handle the expenses if we helped him with some financial transfers. Dan didn't want to at first, but Roger said it was just temporary, that you'd never notice. He used your money to pay off his renovations, to settle debts with his marina partners. The franchise idea, it was never real. It was his project, not ours. We just went along with it. Her voice broke. I thought I could live with it, but I can't. Roger stood abruptly. That's enough. You don't know what you're saying. Evelyn's hand went up. Please sit down, Mr. Pierce. Mrs. Mercer, do you wish to continue this voluntarily? I nodded once. I do. Mallory's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve any of this. You were kind to me, and I helped them take advantage of you. I can't carry it anymore. Evelyn slid a document across the table toward her. Mrs. Pierce Mercer, this is a written confession template. If you wish to formalize what you've just said, sign here. I'll notarize immediately. Roger's voice thundered through the room. Mallory, don't you dare sign anything. Dan finally looked up, his face pale. Dad, stop. I said quiet, Roger barked. But Marcus had already stepped forward, placing a small folder on the table. You might want to sit down before you make that sound like an order. Roger froze. Marcus opened the folder, revealing printed invoices, photographs, and email transcripts. These, he said evenly, are copies of payments made from accounts linked to both your construction firm and Daniel Mercer's personal account. They detail renovations on your yacht and marina, all made within 48 hours of transfers from Mrs. Mercer's savings. Vivian's face drained of color. Roger, Marcus continued. And this, he added, pulling out one more page, is an email from you to your contractor confirming that the funds came through. I took the liberty of having it verified by the hosting server. It's legitimate. Roger's mouth opened, then closed again. The air felt thick, humming with the vibration of something breaking. Mallory reached for the pen, her hand trembling. I'll sign. The room was silent except for the scratch of ink on paper. Evelyn stamped the seal beside her signature, the sound sharp and final. When it was done, Mallory pushed the document toward me. I can't undo what we did, but I can stop lying about it. I met her gaze, and for the first time, I saw her, not as the woman who'd stood by her husband's deceit, but as someone finally finding her voice. Thank you, I said quietly. Roger turned toward Dan, fury twisting his features. You fool! You think this will save her? It'll ruin you. Dan stood slowly. His voice was low, strained, but steady. No, Dad. It'll save what's left of me. He looked at me then, eyes red, jaw tight, and whispered, I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't answer right away. Sometimes silence carries more forgiveness than words ever could. Evelyn gathered the documents, her movements efficient but reverent, as if handling sacred relics. These records, she said calmly, will be filed first thing tomorrow. I suggest you all consider your next steps carefully. Roger muttered something under his breath and stormed out, Vivian trailing after him. The door slammed, but the house didn't shake. When the sound faded, the air felt cleaner somehow, lighter. Mallory sat crying softly. Dan stood still, staring at the envelope on the table, the same one that had once turned his face white. You were right, he said finally. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. I looked out the window at the sea, sunlight glinting across the water. Justice, I said softly, has its own tide. You can fight it, but eventually it reaches shore. Mallory wiped her tears. Evelyn placed a hand on my shoulder. Marcus nodded once, then quietly stepped outside to make a call. The house fell silent again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one was full, not empty. I poured a glass of water, sipped it slowly, and felt the salt of my tears mix with the taste of calm. 2 weeks passed after that day, and the world felt strangely still, as if the sea itself had exhaled after holding its breath too long. The Pierces withdrew their challenge without another word. Roger sold his yacht quietly, trying to cover debts the papers were now whispering about. Vivian closed her social accounts and stopped attending the country club luncheons she once ruled. Dan moved out of their shadow, or maybe it was the other way around. Mallory stayed in touch. Every few days, she sent a short message, never excuses, just gratitude, apology, or silence, when silence said more. Evelyn handled the filings with precision. Marcus sent a single text when it was done. All clean, no loose ends. That morning, the mail arrived late. Among the bills and charity flyers was a thick ivory envelope stamped with the seal of the Coastal Veterans Foundation. My hands hesitated before opening it. Inside was a letter written in firm, deliberate handwriting. Dear Mrs. Mercer, your contribution has provided housing for 3 veterans who were previously unsheltered. They've moved into permanent homes this week. We wanted you to know your kindness didn't just change lives. It restored hope. If you're ever nearby, we'd love to show you the work you've made possible. I read it twice, then folded it carefully against my chest. My throat tightened, but my heart felt light. Later that afternoon, I drove to the foundation. The building was modest, a renovated duplex near the water, painted white with blue shutters. A small wooden sign, out front read, Welcome Home. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and sea salt. Inside, a woman greeted me warmly and led me through a short hallway to a sunny community room. There were photos on the wall, smiling faces, volunteers painting, new furniture, fresh gardens. She gestured toward a young man near the window, adjusting a curtain rod. Mrs. Mercer, she said softly, this is Tommy. He moved in last week. He turned, startled, then smiled shyly. He couldn't have been more than 28. His hands were rough, his eyes kind, but tired. You're the one who helped fund this place, right? I nodded. I just made sure the right people could. He laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. Ma'am, before this, I was sleeping behind the bus station downtown. I used to look at the ocean and wonder if I'd ever see it from a real window again. Now I do. Every morning. I didn't know what to say. Words felt too small. He looked at me for a moment, then extended his hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "You gave me a home." I took his hand. "No," I whispered. "You reminded me what one is." He smiled and walked me through the small kitchen, proudly pointing out the new stove, the pantry, the coffee machine someone had donated. There was laughter from another room, two other veterans, joking as they assembled furniture. The sound filled the air like music. When I stepped outside, the afternoon sun had turned the water to glass. The breeze carried faint notes of salt and grass. I stood by the railing, watching gulls wheel above the waves. For the first time in months, I felt something unclench inside me. Not victory, not revenge, just peace. Behind me, Tommy's voice called out, "Hey, Mrs. Mercer." I turned. He handed me an envelope. "You left this on the table." It wasn't mine. It was from the foundation's director, addressed again in that same careful handwriting. Inside was a short note. "When people lose faith in family, they sometimes find it in humanity. Thank you for proving that both can still exist." I pressed the paper to my heart, feeling the words settle deep. Driving home, I passed the marina where Roger's yacht used to sit. The slip was empty now, only the ropes left coiled like the ghost of a lie. The wind rippled the water, erasing even the reflection. When I reached home, I placed the foundation's letter on the mantel beside Henry's photo. His eyes, frozen in time, seemed to smile through the glass. I whispered, "You were right." Truth rose on its own. The house was quiet again, but not empty. The kind of quiet that breathes, not breaks. That evening, as I watched the sunset, my phone buzzed, a message from Mallory. "I visited the veterans' home today. It's beautiful. Thank you for letting something good come from all this." I smiled, typing back only 2 words. "We healed." The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of rose and gold across the water. I thought of all the years I'd spent trying to protect my son from failure, and how, in the end, the only way to save him was to stop saving him. The ocean rolled softly in the distance, patient and eternal. I closed my eyes, letting the sound fill me, like a benediction. It was early morning when I zipped up the small blue suitcase I'd once packed for the trip that never happened. The same linen pants, the same coral blouse, the same seashell brooch Henry had given me on our honeymoon. The clothes no longer carried the weight of disappointment. They carried history, softened and clean. Outside, the dawn sky was brushed in muted pinks, the air cool enough to taste the salt. I locked the door, turned the key slowly, and whispered, "Thank you," to the house that had held every version of me. The wife, the mother, the believer, and finally, the woman who learned how to let go. The taxi ride to the port was quiet. The driver hummed softly along to an old country song on the radio, the kind Henry used to play while fixing things around the house. Through the window, palm trees blurred past, their shadows long and thin on the asphalt. The sea appeared gradually, first a shimmer, then a vast expanse of blue so wide it looked like forgiveness itself. At the dock, the ship towered above everything, white, gleaming, serene. People were boarding with laughter and luggage, their voices rising like birds. I stepped onto the deck and felt the wooden boards sway gently under my feet. The breeze lifted my hair, cool and alive. I found my cabin easily, though I barely stayed there. Instead, I walked straight to the upper deck, where the horizon stretched without end. The air smelled like salt and sunblock, the faint music of distant chatter blending with the rhythm of the waves. Leaning against the railing, I closed my eyes. For a moment, I wasn't 63 or widowed or weary. I was just alive, and the sea didn't ask for explanations. I reached into my bag and took out a small envelope, the one Mallory had mailed last week. Inside was a letter from Dan. I'd read it only once, but I'd carried it with me ever since. The paper was creased, the handwriting uneven. Mom, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I understand now. You weren't trying to punish me. You were trying to save me from becoming someone I couldn't respect. I've started working again, honestly this time. Mallory and I are trying to rebuild, without help we don't deserve. If you ever decide to take that cruise, I hope you'll think of us, not with anger, but with peace. Love, Dan. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into my bag. There was no bitterness left, only the quiet ache of love that had finally stopped trying to fix what wasn't broken in me. I pulled out my phone and opened Henry's old voicemail once more. His voice filled the sea air around me. See the ocean for us. I smiled, tears stinging the corners of my eyes. I am, I whispered. I finally am. The ship horn sounded, low and deep as we began to move. The dock drifted away, the land shrinking into a distant memory. Sunlight spilled across the deck, turning the water into 1,000 fragments of gold. I leaned forward, letting the wind brush my face, the scent of salt sharp and clean. Every moment of humiliation, every lie, every silence, they'd all carried me here. Not to revenge, but to renewal. In the distance, a pod of dolphins broke the surface, gliding effortlessly through the waves. I laughed softly, remembering how Henry used to say the sea keeps secrets for those who speak kindly to it. I closed my eyes and spoke softly into the wind, not to anyone in particular, but to the life I'd reclaimed. When he asked for more, I gave him this instead, and his face turned white. The words settled into the air like a final note in a long, gentle song. The ship cut through the water, steady and sure. I stayed by the railing, watching the sunlight dance across the horizon until the shoreline disappeared completely. The ocean was endless ahead of me, and for the first time in a very long time, so was I.